Imagine for a moment that you came back to your home late at night and instead of finding your kids in bed, your whole family is huddled together in a state of terror. They are all convinced that there is something at the door and it's been trying to get in. So you grab a weapon and a flashlight and you go to investigate. Maybe you're expecting to find an animal scapering off into the shadows, or maybe you're just worried it might just be something that you stumble across, which was someone trying to break into your home. What you might not expect to find is something that seems to defy all rational explanation, something that leaves behind some footprints that confuse and confound investigators, and something that would serve to be only the first reported sighting, one that would open the floodgates to plenty of your neighbors beginning to come out with tales of their own, with encounters, sightings, and hard-to-explain occurrences all over your small town. Welcome to what has become known as the Enfield Horror. When it comes to any sort of encounter with something unexplained or unusual, the first witnesses are always put in a very odd position. They seem confident in what they saw, they know what they believed that they experienced. But what if no one believes them that they actually did? There is always that chance that if they go public with it, if they report it to authorities, that they will become some sort of laughingstock within their own community and even further afield. But much like the recent videos on the Flatwood Monster and the Dover Demon, the Enfield Horror is going to prove again that these fears are unfounded. Yes, it is possible that no one else may have a clue as to what you're talking about, but then again, do they really need to? But if these cases are to be taken as fair examples, there seems to be a fair higher chance that others will come forward with their own similar tales, as long as you weren't absolutely tweaking. So today, we're headed over to White County in Illinois in the American Midwest and to Enfield specifically to see what exactly this one is all about. And this seems as good a place as any to point out that this is a completely different Enfield from the one in England, and the English equivalent, located in London, was the site of its own supernatural and hard-to-explain incident known as the Enfield Poltergeist, but that is a story for another time. The US village of Enfield has never reported a population of about 1,000 people since its historical census records began in 1880, with a reported high water mark of about 906 in 1950, and then dropping down to just below 600 in the year 2010. Basically, that is a dying city. Located towards the western side of White County, it covers just over 3 square kilometers, and other than the incident that we're looking at today, what became known as the Enfield Monster or Enfield Horror, its only other claim to fame appears to be that it was the birthplace of an MLB player known as Charles Dewey Jamerson, who played a single game for the Boston Red Sox in 1924. All of that would change on the 25th of April, 1973. Henry McDaniel had returned home from work between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, only to find his family in a state of absolute terror. They had been hearing scratching at the door as though something was trying to get in. It was a wild night with the wind howling, and there was every chance that it could have either been nothing at all or some form of wildlife that was just out there trying to get in. Maybe it smelled food. Who's to say? Once he had retrieved his firearm and flashlight, he ventured outside to see if there was anything out there. According to his later descriptions, what he saw through the gloom was a creature unlike anything else he had ever seen before. He said it had 3 legs and 2 small short arms with claws on each end. Its skin was slimy and gray in appearance, and the creature had pink eyes that he stated were as big as flashlights. He would estimate its height at somewhere between 4 and 4.5 feet tall. McDaniel then opened fire on the creature, absolute Chad, letting off 4 shots, and would claim that at least one of them made contact with the creature. In response to either the wound or the noise, it would then make a hissing sound and flee, taking enormous and probable leaps to speed away from the house. He would report what he saw to the authorities, who were understandably a little skeptical of the entire thing. They probably asked him, "Sir, are you on meth?" They did, however, investigate the area around his home and were surprised to find a series of strange paw prints that appeared to be similar to a dog's but had too many toes. 6, in fact. When word of the encounter began to get out, this would probably have been the moment that McDaniel and his family, alongside the investigating officers, might have expected some ridicule or at least some healthy doses of skepticism to come in. Instead, what they found was that other members of the small community went the entire opposite direction. They began to come up with their own tales of strange occurrences, with their own brushes with what was fastly becoming known as the Enfield Monster. A young boy who had reported being attacked by an unknown creature less than an hour previously that same evening. He had been clawed and scratched by it, sustaining some marks to his arms, and his shoes had been damaged by what was described as talons on the creature's feet. Which means if it's attacking humans, you gotta go kill that thing. So local law enforcement, particularly the sheriff named Roy Poshard Jr., seemed inclined to not quite silence Henry McDaniel, but at least kind of limit how far this tale was spreading. They seemed to be certain that while there was no doubt that the young boy had been attacked by an animal and Henry had encountered and possibly shot either the same thing or something else outside of his home, all this talk of glowing eyes, 3 legs, and something supernatural were going to bring nothing but trouble. And to a certain degree, they were right. Henry had a second alleged encounter with the creature on the 6th of May in the early hours of the morning. On this occasion, he saw it down near the train tracks and watched it for a number of minutes. Here's how he described the second encounter. "I saw something moving out on the railroad track, and there it stood. I didn't shoot it or anything. It started on down the railroad track. It wasn't in a hurry or nothing." Nothing in the description had changed, and he is adamant it was the same creature he had encountered outside of his home, perhaps the same that others had encountered, or even the one that had terrorized the young boy. And despite the warnings from the sheriff to keep it quiet, which, I mean, who cares? Henry was not shy about spreading the story, and soon it had piqued the interest of people from further afield. Visitors would come from pretty much everywhere to have their own chance to spot whatever it was that was terrorizing Enfield, and some of them actually showed up with guns intent on hunting and killing or capturing the creature, which, remember, if we can get this channel to 1 million subscribers by, June of 2027, I'm gonna go up to Michigan and try to find the Michigan Dogman. Statements made moments before disaster. So a group of these would-be hunters were arrested by the sheriff after they opened fire on an unknown creature in the woods, certain it was the beast, which is really stupid. They described it as gray, and some of them even compared it to an ape of some sort. The sheriff would later state that the group were arrested for hunting license infringements, and he got the impression that they mentioned the monster hunting only as a throwaway attempt to get out of trouble. Really, it was probably just a furry. The director of the Indiana radio station, named Rick Rainbow, would have his own encounter when he visited the area with some friends, trying to catch a glimpse of the monster in its growing infamy. They spotted it in an area not far from Henry McDaniel's home and described it as taller, probably around the 5-foot mark, but that it fled with what they called an unnatural speed when spotted. As it ran, it let loose a shriek that Rick claimed to record on a tape recorder, a recording that he would share with future visitors and cryptid enthusiasts. Over time, the sightings and the visitors would gradually kind of tail off. But the legend was born, and whatever the Enfield horror or Enfield monster truly was, would remain a topic that would be divisive amongst almost all who have heard of it. So before we delve into the possible explanations for the creature and the suggestions, both rational and less conventional, as always, we'll briefly cover any other cryptids that sort of share something that we've also been covering, so it's like you can kind of maybe see it's possibly the same thing. Whether these are helpful in figuring out what we think about the Enfield horror is kind of largely irrelevant, but this is mainly just for comparison. So enjoy the comparison, you nerd, to see if there is any sort of repeating patterns across various encounters, because it's important to do so, or possibly even to see if there are any other situations that might interest any of you that you want to look into the future, which you should drop in the comments because I'm always open to suggestions. There have been several cryptid encounters on this channel that have some overlap with one another, and the longer I do this, the more I kind of see it's the same thing. Like, the Beast of Bray Row was another creature that caused mayhem with sporadic sightings. Similarly, the recent videos on the Flatwood Monster and the Dover Demon all cover encounters that happen in small towns or villages that essentially put them on the map. Of course, there's always the classic Michigan Dogman. So anyways, looking a little more generally larger scale, I think many aspects of the Enfield monster seem more in line with something like the Mount Vernon creature, located less than 40 miles away from Enfield, where a spat of encounters in the early 1940s with an unidentified creature set a local rumor mill turning in the wake of animal deaths and unconfirmed reports of a bizarre leaping mode of travel. Those that focus in on the descriptions of the monster as being ape-like in some way draw easy comparisons to Bigfoot or Sasquatch, easily one of the most famous cryptids of all time. Maybe the monster was not quite on the same scale as this in every way, but there is definitely a precedent set for unidentified ape-like creatures to haunt the back and beyond in North America and further out. So where do we start, I guess, when it comes to looking for an explanation for the Enfield horror or the Enfield monster as it's also known? Let's begin with the theories that have been posed by those who treat some or all of the reports with a fair dose of skepticism. Also, do not mention that voice crack just now. I went out Saturday night, it's Monday morning, I still feel like crap. So here we'll find a number of the greatest hits of rational explanations for irrational events. And one of the ones that we have come across and discussed many times by this point for all sorts of encounters is that the creature in question was a more standard, normal animal that was just misidentified in the moment by the person who reported it. The hissing noise that the creature made as it effected its escape was described by McDaniel as like a wildcat, and some have latched onto this idea, pointing out that while the creature was said to have 3 legs, it would be easy to either miss one while kind of being in a panicked state, or to even come across an animal that had just lost one of their legs. Proponents of this theory also point out to the red or pink eyes that were described, noting that especially at night, most felines have eyes that appear to glow. However, it should be noted that there are a few wildcats that ever had their skin described as slimy. Another suggestion for misidentification is one that appears ridiculous initially, but may have a little more merit to it when you sit down and you really think about it. Could it have been a kangaroo? Now bear with us on this one. Firstly, it would be one of the few animals in existence that would be capable of somewhat matching the escape technique described in the initial sighting. Leaping and bounding away, maybe not in jumps as large as 50 feet or possibly use several jumps, but we need to allow for some margin of error here. Similarly, given that it has a strong, thick tail, it could be misinterpreted by a person in a state of panic as a 3rd leg. The description of the arms of being short and with clawed appendages could match that of a kangaroo. The big sticking point for this explanation is that it's not one that we've overlooked. It's what would a kangaroo even be doing in Enfield, Illinois in the first place? The explanations for exotic creatures in unlikely locations do tend to have a typical trend to them. Escape from a zoo or a circus, a pet kept by a collector, illegally or otherwise, and maybe it just had gotten loose. And I mean, really, the beast of Gévaudan, like back in France in the day, that just appears to have been possibly a young lion. So while there may not be any reports of a local establishment being one kangaroo down, there is some mention of at least one man in Ohio who claimed to have lost his pet, Macy, and believed it could be the cause of these sightings. How seriously or otherwise the investigating authorities took this report is not known. Other suggestions have included animals as odd as an ape or as mundane as any number of local animals, perhaps even suffering from some sort of unknown illness or deformity. When it comes to the other sightings that followed in the wake of the McDaniel one, if we are going to kind of go down that route of misidentified animal, then they would be nothing more than further examples of whatever creature this was popping up around the village and then being spotted by others. If someone is inclined to believe that the sightings were legitimate and accurately reported, then this lends credibility to the creature being real. However, some who are less believing try to suggest that this is another example of some sort of mass hysteria, where the reports of the initial sighting, including the physical description and behavioral aspects, become common knowledge and influence the subsequent sightings that people will see. Or they believe what they see is something else based on what they've heard. And some put it down to some combination of either imagination, hoax, or an attempt by people to latch onto the latest thing that was going on. But what about the people who believe that there could be something to the sightings after all? The ones who are certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there is something out there in the night, and beyond that, it was something far surpassing our current understanding of what should be out there in the night. For those that are more believing, they point to the fact that Henry McDaniel stood to gain very little from fabricating or even exaggerating what he had seen that night. In fact, he would have had to deliberately scare his family, let off some rounds recklessly in the night, and then lie about it to the authorities if the scenario was completely made up. And as for the misidentification, they point to the fact that his description of the creature was extremely specific, even the details that really don't seem to track too closely with any other animal that is known either in the area or further beyond that. If he was intent on making up a story for reasons unknown, then surely he could have come up with something that was either a little closer to a normal description of a standard animal or something that was truly off the wall and out there. Certainly, there aren't too many three-legged creatures dotting about, but there was nothing much else about his description that was so far from reality that it couldn't be considered at least in some way plausible. And they also point out the fact that other residents came forward with their own stories and encounters in the wake of the first one. To those that are dubious about the scenario, it is evidence of either a shared delusion or a bandwagon jumping essentially, but to others that may be more inclined to take an account at face value, it is proof that there must be something out there. After all, as small a community as Enfield is and was at the time, how likely does it truly seem that multiple groups of people would all have encounters with this unknown entity and that they would share so many characteristics? What was the creature then in the mind of a believer? Some will claim it was nothing more and nothing less than just a cryptid, an animal that is unknown to modern science, that is not fully discovered or understood, but that exists nonetheless. Something out with the range of what we would normally expect to see and encounter. And if the descriptions are accurate, then there is certainly something completely new and remarkable to be discovered in Enfield. Something to be studied and understood if it ever appears again. Others have claimed it didn't seem like anything known to us already on Earth because it wasn't from Earth itself. They claim it was an extraterrestrial that had come from outer space somewhere, and this explains its strange behavior, its odd demeanor, and the reason that it stuck with so many people that happened to catch a glimpse of it. They point to the gray skin, the large glowing eyes, and the diminutive height, and draw rather shaky comparisons to the classic gray alien or another type as yet to be classified. So where does that leave us then? With all the possible suggestions and explanations laid out, which one kind of seems the most likely. One thing to note is that the young boy Greg would later claim that he had reported his own sighting as a hoax in order to get a rise out of the local press. And upon later review, researchers would realize that while the story that was fed to the press and the one that generated the interest and the visitors claimed that many townspeople had come forward with their own tales of the monster, they could really only identify 3 accounts at best. Henry McDaniel, for his part, remained adamant that he saw what he saw twice, no less. He would also fight back on the assertions that it could have just been an escaped kangaroo, given that he was allegedly familiar with how the animals looked and behaved. When a 1978 study by members of the Western Illinois University concluded, they seemed to come down on the side of the creature being a misidentified animal of some description, and reported that Henry McDaniel was known to have an active imagination, which may have colored what he believed he saw that night and the second encounter. Ultimately, when we look at all the elements together, it does seem the most rational to believe that there was indeed something out there that night, maybe something that wasn't normally in the region or local to the area, but a combination of high stress led Henry McDaniel to see things a little differently than they truly were. And the story, whipped up into more than what it really even is, captured the imagination of people pretty much everywhere, feeding the flames and building it up into something far more otherworldly than what it truly was. It is arguably most plausible that this creature was something conventional, if unexpected, and the description and retelling of the encounter led to it taking on a life of its own. Or it could also be a 3-legged monster from outer space, as McDaniel claimed. We are not really likely to ever kind of know for certain. So there you have it, the story of the Enfield monster, or the Enfield horror. Let us know what you think is the most plausible explanation, or if there are any similar stories that would be worth covering in a follow-up video. Ape, kangaroo, cryptid, or alien. You can choose, and whatever the truth is, the legend was born that night in Enfield, and it lives on to this very day. But now we've approached the point in the video where it's time for just some wild speculation. Okay, so here you have this creature. Obviously, it has slimy skin, 3 legs allegedly, which could be a tail. It could be a kangaroo. Now, the big thing about kangaroo being an area they're not native to is let's kind of look through what can happen here. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, it is a kangaroo. You have no idea if it's fallen in the mud. Maybe it gave itself a mud bath. Maybe it's just hairless. Maybe it has some sort of genetic defect that it does not actually grow fur in a typical manner. While you may be familiar with kangaroo, in the middle of the night when your family's freaking out and you're freaking out, it may have just been an absolutely normal animal that got tagged with a shot and then freaked out and then wanted to get away from that area as fast as possible. I believe that is a complete possibility. Do I think it's an alien? Probably not. This definitely to me seems like just a misidentified animal. Like sometimes in these cryptid stories, you'll get an idea, I guess is the best way to say it, of like, okay, I could totally see this being something else. And then sometimes it's like, wow, that is really strange. To me, Enfield horror, definitely a misidentified animal based on that. And also, it's important to realize that the human brain and kind of the way it works is it's all based on association. So for instance, this is the best example I like to give on my main channel, but I get migraines, right? So when I get migraines, I actually get blind spots in my vision, but it's not just a black screen there. Like, it's not like, oh, I don't see out of that eye. What I'm actually not doing is taking in visual information. So my brain is quite literally filling in missing visual information because it knows what's there, it just doesn't know the finer details. So if I'm looking at a face, I will see no face, but I will see like skin over it. I just don't see like the features associated with it. My brain knows there's skin there, it knows there's a face there, so it tries to build it, but it just doesn't have incoming information. It's sort of like another guy he was actually blind when he was a kid, and all the way up until he became an adult, he was blind. Well, they restored his vision, I think at like around 40 years old, and it was the first time he had ever seen in his life, essentially because his brain had never actually seen sight before or had seen objects or anything like that. So his brain had no association that it could use to actually properly see. So it was a bit overwhelming. He's probably good now that his brain has kind of allowed itself, or not allowed itself, but figured out what the world is around it so he can see better. But the whole point of this is, if you've never seen something before and somebody says, yeah, this is what it is and this is what it looks like, your brain can actually fill in that missing information automatically because you've heard it before. So it's trying to make an association. That's the interesting part about the human brain. While it can be your best ally, it also can be your biggest op, because it just fills in information all the time that may not even really be true, and you will believe it because it's you making that information. It's just how the human mind works. It's a very interesting organ. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think it was just a misidentified animal, or do you think it was something more? Leave it down in the comments. Also, if you have any suggestions for the future, I also read those, so leave those down in the comment as well. But I would like to thank my patrons real quick. At the literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Michigan Dogman. I'm really glad he really wants me to go up there. Monkey Man and Stupid Fox. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beaver Laga and Dragon Master Knight. At the first hand accounts tier, we have Pimp Daddy Shamrock and Yeeps. And at the second hand accounts tier, we have Bianca, Fred Rush, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.